was a Jesuit priest and psychologist born in the Netherlands. Born in 1932 in Nijkerk, Netherlands, he was ordained a Jesuit priest in 1957 and studied psychology for another 6 years. After that, he moved to the United States and studied theology and psychology for 2 years. In his 30s, he began teaching psychology at Notre Dame University, and from 1971 he was a professor at Yale University. In 1981, he left the pulpit to know the will of God and the guilt of his abundance, and went to the slums of Peru and lived a life with the people, but returned to the United States and lectured at Harvard University. He left the pulpit again and entered Daybreak, Canada's Toronto community of Larchie, a community for the mentally handicapped, headquartered in Paris, France. The Wounded Healer Chapter 1. Ministry in a Disconnected World. What man in the nuclear age seeks? Nuclear man has lost simple faith in the possibilities of science and technology. He keenly realizes that human beings can self-destruct due to the very power of science that has allowed them to create new lifestyles. I will introduce an old story from ancient India. It will help you understand the situation nuclear man is in. Four princes were debating which specialties each should master. Explore the world and learn a special skill, they decided. So, after deciding on a place to meet again later, they set off in different directions. After some time, the brothers met again at the appointed place. And we asked each other what we had learned. The first prince said, "I've learned the art of instantly creating flesh from just a single piece of a creature's bone." The second prince said, "I know how to add skin to the creature's bones if they have flesh attached to them, and make the hair grow." The third prince said, "With flesh, skin and hair, I can make limbs." Finally, the fourth prince spoke. "If the creature has limbs and is perfectly formed, I know how to bring it to life." So the four brothers went into the jungle in search of a piece of bone so they could showcase their skills. Perhaps by a twist of fate, the bones the four princes found were those of a lion. But they picked up the bone without knowing anything. The first fleshed out the bones, the second covered them with skin and made them grow hair, the third made limbs to fit them and made the body complete, and the fourth breathed life into the lion. The beast, brought back to life, arose with a lush mane shaking and charged at its creators with a fearsome mouth, razor-sharp teeth and ruthless claws. After killing all four princes, the lion disappeared into the forest with a satisfied look on his face. Historical psychologist Robert J. Lifton defines the nature of nuclear man's difficulties in several prominent concepts. According to Lipton's definition, nuclear man can be characterized by a historical break, a fragmented ideology, and the quest for a new immortality. According to my own experience of the nuclear man's obsession and suffering, there are mystical and revolutionary methods for the nuclear man to break the shell of the egg in which he is trapped and fly away. Both are ways of experiential transcendence. Both of these methods give you a new perspective and suggest a new lifestyle. However, I found out that Jesus clearly showed it to us as Christians. Jesus is the one who clearly showed that revolution and conversion are inseparable to human beings who seek empirical transcendence. Jesus came among us and made it clear that no one can deny that changing the human heart and transforming human society are not separate tasks, but are linked like the two pillars of the cross. Jesus was a revolutionary, but he was not an extremist. He did not give an idea, but he gave himself. Although Jesus was a mystic, he did not use his close relationship with God to evade social evil, but rather shocked those around him by being executed as a traitor. In this sense, Jesus is still the way to the liberation and freedom of nuclear people. You would be hesitant to consider yourself a mystic or a revolutionary. But if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you will recognize that there is a mystic or a revolutionary within you. Sometimes it's obvious to the point of being irritating, sometimes it's only partially present. You will find him in your neighborhood, in your family, and even in the struggles going on in your heart. For he is in every person who draws strength from the visions that gradually emerge in his own life and lead to a new world. A vision of a new world, that is what we dream of and what guides our actions. It moves us forward, even at great risk, with the certainty that one day man will be free, that he will love freely. Chapter 2. Ministry for the Rootless Generation, looking into the eyes of fugitives. Before discussing the future of Christian ministry, let me tell you a little story to set the right tone for the discussion. One day a young fugitive came to a small village to hide from his enemies. The villagers treated the fugitive kindly and even provided a place to stay. But when soldiers looking for the fugitive came and asked where he was hiding, the villagers were all terrified. The soldiers threatened to set the village on fire and kill all the villagers if the fugitives were not released before dawn. The villagers went to the pastor and asked what to do. The pastor pondered whether to hand the boy over to the enemy or let the villagers die, then went into his room and read the Bible, hoping to get an answer before dawn. Quite a bit of time passed, and around dawn, the pastor came across a verse of the Word. He said, "It is better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish." The pastor closed the Bible and called the soldiers to tell them where the boy was hiding. After the soldiers dragged the fugitive off to death, a festival was held in the village. Because the pastor saved the lives of the villagers. But the pastor was not happy with it, and he shut himself up in his room in deep sorrow. That night an angel came to him and asked, "What have you done?" "I handed the fugitive over to the enemy." "Don't you know that you handed over the Messiah?" Then the pastor was distressed and asked back, "How could I have known that?" Then the angel said, "If you had ever gone to the boy and looked into his eyes instead of reading the Bible, you would have known that." If, as Reisman said, today's generation is an anonymous member of the lonely crowd, then tomorrow's generation will be the children of this lonely crowd. Looking into the eyes of young people, we can get a glimpse of what their world is like. As we looked into the eyes of the young fugitive, we discovered that he was introverted, fatherless, and obsessive. We didn't want to hand him over to the enemy to be killed. Instead, we wanted to take him to the heart of our town and find in that young man the one who would save this frightened world. To do so, we must be able to accurately express what is happening inside us, and have a compassionate, contemplative attitude. I believe that accurate expression is the basic quality that future spiritual leaders should have. A person who is able to accurately describe the movements of his inner life, to give specific names to his various experiences, to understand and to explain them, is no longer a victim of his ego. He can slowly and steadily remove the barriers to the Holy Spirit's entry. He can make room within himself for someone who has a bigger heart than himself, eyes that see more than he does, and hands that can heal more than he does. Knowing that future generations will not only demand precise expression as introverted generations, but will also seek a new kind of authority as fatherless generations, then we must find out what the nature of this authority is. It seems difficult to find a more suitable word than compassion to express the essence of that authority. To a merciful person, nothing pertaining to humanity is foreign to him. That is, no joy, no sorrow, no way of life, no way of death is alien to him. There is authority in this mercy. For mercy draws people out of the fearful act of creating sects into a wide world where all men can be neighbors to one another. The Christian minister, who has heard the voice of the Holy Spirit within himself and compassionately rediscovered his fellow men, can look at the people he meets, the relationships he forms, and the events in which he is involved from a different angle. He may be able to outline a new world hidden behind the veil of everyday life. As a contemplative critic, he always keeps a distance from the urgent and direct work so as not to indulge himself. But by maintaining that same distance, he reveals the true beauty of man and his world, always different, always attractive, always new. Is the mission too heavy? That would be the case if each individual had to complete this task individually. But clearly, leadership is a common calling and develops when we work closely together in community. In such a community, all members realize that, as Chardin said, nothing is worldly to those who have eyes to see. In the end, a person of prayer is a person who can recognize the face of the Messiah from others, who reveals what is hidden, and who can grasp the reality of what has not been specifically grasped. Chapter 3. Ministry for the Hopeless, Waiting for Tomorrow. In this chapter, one would like to draw attention to the simplest structure in which leadership takes place, the meeting of two people. It is in this one-on-one encounter that we discover some principles of Christian leadership, which also apply to more complex leadership relationships. We will use a brief conversation between a patient and a visitor in the hospital as a starting point for discussion. The patient, Mr. Harrison, is a 48-year-old farm worker who is stocky and rough-looking and has a hard time expressing himself verbally. Coming from a very humble Baptist family, he is completely lost in the strange and unfamiliar surroundings of a big city hospital, where he is admitted for leg surgery. He suffers from arrhythmia. Visitor John Allen is a seminarian undergoing clinical pastoral training for 1 year under the chaplain of this hospital. This is John's second visit to Mr. Harrison. The patient sits in the middle of the hospital room in a wheelchair. There are other patients in the room, some of whom are talking to each other. In the midst of this, the following conversation comes and goes. John, Mr. Harrison, the last time I stopped by to see you for a while. Harrison, oh, yes. I remember. John, how are you? Harrison, yes, they were scheduled to operate on me last week. They anesthetized me and took me to the operating room, but my heart was beating so fast. They decided that it would be better not to have surgery that day and they brought me back here. So, I have surgery tomorrow. John, your heart beat too fast. Harrison, yeah, they thought the risk was too great to proceed with the operation under those circumstances. I think I'm ready for surgery now. I think it will work. John, do you feel ready? Harrison, I'm not ready to die yet. I think you should get surgery. If you don't, you'll lose your leg. John, you're not ready for the end, but if possible, you hope that something will be done so you don't lose a leg. Harrison, yes. If this is the end, I'll be a lost soul. John, you're worried in case the operation isn't successful. Harrison, yes. Of course, according to them, it is not such a difficult operation. They'll anesthetize me here and keep me here until surgery. Of course, I don't want to die during the operation. I would rather die a natural death than die under anesthesia. John, it's possible during surgery, but the only way you'll get well is to have surgery. Harrison, yes, that's right. John, there are many things waiting for Mr. Harrison when he is discharged, right? Harrison, nothing, nobody. Only hard work awaits me. John, just hard labor. Harrison, yes, it is. Of course I have to get my strength back. By the time of the tobacco harvest, I think I will be ready to work. John, I guess you want to grow tobacco. Harrison, yeah, the harvest starts around August. John, well, Mr. Harrison, I hope things go well for you tomorrow. Harrison, thank you. Thank you for coming. John, see you again. Goodbye. Harrison, bye. John never spoke to Mr. Harrison again. The very day after we spoke, Mr. Harrison died during surgery. He probably would have been better off saying he never woke up from anesthesia. John had to guide Mr. Harrison at this critical moment into a new tomorrow. So what did tomorrow mean? For Mr. Harrison, that meant returning to the tobacco plantation or entering the realm beyond death. Waiting for tomorrow is part of Christian leadership. It requires personal interest, a deep belief in the value and meaning of life, and a powerful desire to transcend the boundaries of death. Therefore, it becomes clear that Christian leadership can only be achieved through service. To serve, a human being must be willing to step into a situation with all the vulnerabilities he has to share with his fellow man. Because it is an experience of self-denial, it is accompanied by pain, but at the same time it is also an experience that can rescue humans from the prison of confusion and fear. The paradox of Christian leadership is that the only way in is the way out. In other words, only when we share in human suffering can we be saved from that suffering. Just as John had to go into Mr. Harrison's anguish and wait for him there, so all Christians are challenged to enter into their fears with their neighbors, overcome their fears, share in their sufferings, and walk together on the road to freedom. Chapter 4. The ministry of the lonely minister. There are many people in this obsessive world who are very bold in raising their voices that we are waiting for a liberator. They say they are waiting for a Messiah who will give us peace and justice, free us from hatred and oppression, from nationalism and war. Then how will our liberator come? I found an old story in the Talmud that might provide a clue to the answer to this question. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi happened to meet the prophet Elijah at the entrance to the cave of Rabbi Simran ben Yohai. He asked Eliah, "When will the Messiah come? Go and ask him yourself." "Where is he?" "He is sitting at the gate." "How can I recognize him?" "He is sitting among the poor, who are full of scars." People open up their wounds all at once and then bandage them up again, but he unties and bandages one wound at a time. And he said, "Maybe these people will need me. I must always be ready, so as not to delay at that time." The rabbi went to the Messiah and said, "Peace be with you, my Lord and teacher." Messiah answered, "Peace be with Levi's son. When will the Lord come?" When he asked, the Messiah replied, "Today." Rabbi Joshua went back to Elijah and Elijah asked him, "What did he say to you?" "He actually cheated on me. He said to me, 'I will come today,' but he didn't come." Elijah said, "What he said to you was, 'If you want to hear his voice today.'" According to this story, the Messiah sits among the poor, bandaging up his wounds one at a time, waiting for the time when she will be needed. The same goes for ministers. Since it is the duty of his minister to give plainly the first signs that the people may be freed, he must carefully band up his wounds, waiting for the moment when his role will become necessary. He is called to be a wounded healer. It is being prepared to heal the wounds of others while caring for your own wounds first. He is a wounded minister and a healing minister. Even when we know we are called to be wounded healers, it is still difficult to admit that healing has to happen today. Because we live in a time when our scars are too visible. Loneliness and isolation have become a huge part of our daily lives. So we desperately seek liberators to deliver us from misery and bring justice and peace. But few proclaim that the liberator sits among the poor, that our wounds are signs of hope, and that today is the day of liberation. But the wounded healer declares, "The Lord is coming. Not tomorrow, but today, not next year, but this year, not after all our miseries are past, but in the midst of them, not anywhere else, but right where we stand." And in the face of a difficult situation, he says, "I want you to hear his voice today, saying, do not harden your hearts, as at Meribah and as in the day of Massah in the wilderness." Indeed, if we believe that ministry is a sign of hope because we can hear that voice and see the light of the coming of the Messiah through ministry, we will help ourselves and others understand that what we ultimately seek is already within us. Therefore, ministry becomes a witness to living truth. The truth is that we will learn later that the wounds that hurt us right now were the place from which God began a new creation. Closing remarks. Moving forward, hospitality is the most important attitude for a minister who wants to provide others with a source of healing from his own wounded condition. When a minister becomes a tolerant host, the meaning of this attitude is evident in the variety of guests that come to him. Mr. Harrison, an old farmer who lost his way in the impersonal environment of a hospital and feared both death and life, a generation of introverted, fatherless, and obsessive people, seeking a new way of immortality in the midst of a fragmented and confused existence. They are all looking for a free space where they can move without fear and discover new directions. If imitating Christ does not mean living as Christ lived, but living our life as truthfully as Christ lived his life, there are many ways or forms of being a Christian. A minister is a person who makes this pursuit of truth possible. He is the one who makes what he pursues available to others. He does not merely stand as an unbiased observer, but is a clear witness of Christ. For a minister, hospitality is when he knows where he is and who to help. It is also about allowing other people to come into your life, allowing them to come close and ask how their life fits into your own. No one can predict what this will lead to. For every time a host is willing to be influenced by his guests, there is a risk of not knowing what the consequences may be. But it is only when we share common pursuits and risks that new ideas emerge, new visions emerge, and new paths are seen. We don't know what we'll be like in 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years. But we know that human beings suffer, and that when we share that suffering, we can move forward. The minister's call is to give his own many guests the confidence to make this move forward. That trust gives people an ever-increasing desire to move on, not to be complacent, and convinces them that the complete liberation of man and of the world is to come. May God be with you all here and now.